The story is told that a century ago, the head of the U.S. Patent Office wrote a letter to President McKinley urging that the Patent Office be shut down, since it was clear to him that everything that could possibly be invented had already been invented. Well, thank goodness the president had the good sense not to take that recommendation. For at that very moment, the world stood on the brink of an explosion of invention and technology that has touched almost every aspect of our daily lives. And it was America the creative, America the inventive, that led the way. In the hour ahead, we'll first revisit the America of 100 years ago through some rare and remarkable early films, photos, art, and illustrations. These from a time long before X-rays and pacemakers, computers and air conditioning, cars or planes, movies, radio or television, CDs or credit cards. How did we ever manage without all those things? We managed. But while we were managing, Americans were always tinkering, always looking for better ways to do things. Not every new idea turned out to be such a good idea. This is true. But if at first you don't succeed, we told ourselves, try again. And with the American can-do spirit and what the world called American know-how, we found out how when we needed to. And the planet hasn't been the same since. I'm Charles Osgood, and this is the century that made America great. There were marvels to be seen already at the dawn of this century, of course. But in many ways, and in most places, 1900 looked pretty much like 1800 or 1700. Power still meant muscle power, mostly. Few Americans had electricity or even knew much about it. There were 76 million of us in 1900, and most of us living unconfined lives out in the country, as did Buffalo Bill there in Wyoming. But we were beginning to head for the big cities of America, little by little, to be whisked from place to place by the elevated train, or to take rides that had no practical purpose at all. It was crowded in the cities, but not very crowded elsewhere in America. The coming of electricity would soon change that. Know where this vast stretch of farmland is? The same view today makes clear where it is. It is Los Angeles, a place in Oklahoma called Tulsi Town. It would grow tenfold in 10 years. A bit of oil found nearby helped Tulsa's growth along. Dallas, Big D when it was anything but, and downtown today where the great stretches of space are vertical stretches. Our nation's capital was a sleepy southern town in World War I. Today, the only sheep being sheared by the locals are the voters. A growing America could be excused for getting a big head. Gutzon Borglum gave us 4 in the 1930s with his great monument at Mount Rushmore. It was the train that shuttled northern tourists to a sprouting Florida backwater town called Miami. It is hard to imagine that in 1920, developers began reinventing 1,600 acres of mangrove swamp into Miami Beach. Power, the kind that drives machines, drove our progress. In 1907, 92% of American homes were without electricity. It was Thomas Edison, usually busier than he is here, who brought electricity into the life of the average American.
Ladies and gentlemen, there have come with incredible rapidity one electrical art after another, so that in practically every respect civilization has been revolutionized. When I look around at the resources of the electrical field today, I feel that I would be glad to begin again my work as an electrician and inventor in this day of electricity.
Edison's day of electricity would see 1 billion lights burning bright and a nation changed forever. Life on the farm remained radically different. of life in the city. Electricity had yet to arrive, but that would soon change. In 1933, the Tennessee Valley Authority began building dams to stop flooding and power plants to bring electricity to 7 southern states. Overnight, those states and the rural families in them stepped directly into the modern world. Meantime, America's cities were growing bigger than ever. Photographer Lewis Hines' 1921 portrait of a steam fitter captures perfectly the combination of muscle and steel that was building the cities at such a fantastic rate. In fact, nothing separates the 20th century more obviously from the 19th century than the skyscraper. These enormities never could have been built, of course, before electricity was available for power and for light. But one other thing was an absolute necessity to the development of the skyscraper, and it was provided by a tinkerer of Vermont, Elisha Otis by name, who invented, in the mid-19th century, the safety elevator. There was nothing new about the idea of mechanically raising and lowering people and goods, of course, but hoist cables tended to break. Otis added a ratchet device to hold his elevator platform firmly in place, even if its cables did break. All safe, gentlemen, all safe, Elisha Otis would say to astonished onlookers, in effect announcing the way of the future. The way was up. Up to the Empire State Building, for instance. It was the tallest building on Earth when it was completed in 1931. 1,250 feet high, 102 stories tall, with 1,000 miles of wiring, an unimaginably modern place to go to work. Another unimaginable creation of the 1930s was below ground level, the Lincoln Tunnel, built 100 feet under the Hudson River to ease the flow of traffic from New Jersey to New York. Thousands of men, sandhogs they were called, worked day and night for 4 years to dig the Lincoln Tunnel, which actually is a complex of 5 tunnels, each over 8,000 feet long. 20 men would die working underground in dangerous pressurized chambers. But the sandhogs continued. They put 8 million tons of steel into place, and drilled and dynamited their way through stone and silt at the rate of 35 feet every day. In 1937, the Lincoln Tunnel was opened, and all these years later, it is busier than ever. Across the continent, another marvel takes shape. The Golden Gate Bridge will tie San Francisco to its northern neighbors and will become forevermore a symbol of the city by the bay. It will be completed in 1937 with towers 65 stories high and cables 3 feet wide. The daredevils who built the Golden Gate would never forget the close calls they had, and they had many.
I guess we were about, I don't know, maybe 600 feet up, and I felt this kind of a funny feeling, and I said to a couple of my crew, I said, there's something wrong here. So we had a bucket of bolts. We tied it to the middle rung of this ladder, and it acted like a pendulum, and started a rock. Go back and forth.
Then the guys they had a railing around. We all got against the railing, and the old thing would, sickening, it would go just, and the guys would say, here we go. and then she'd stop and kind of quiver and then go back the other way. Just like that, about 3 or 4 times. I wouldn't have gone within 4 miles of that thing if I knew I was going to do it again. I had all I wanted. A lot of the guys were laying on the deck, throwing up. Old riggers, too, scared to death.
Well, once in a while, I'll come across the bridge and I'll look at those towers and look how high they are, and see, I worked on that. I remember being up there. That's the feeling I get. It's a proud feeling.
At the 1939 World's Fair in New York, the Ford Motor Company celebrated America in the 20th century. The display at the Ford Pavilion focused not on the country's glittering new bridges and skyscrapers, but on the hard work it took to make the modern age a reality in America. Ford even commissioned a song to honor hard work.
Work, 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 We'd rather be busy than work. It's fun to be giving new standards of living, so work, work, work.
It's fun to be giving new standards of living, so
We'd rather be busy than
standards
work.
of living, so
It's fun to be giving new standards of living, so work,
be busy than
work,
work. Work, work, work. We'd rather be busy.
And hard work brought forth new ideas and new inventions. You know the expression, they laughed at the Wright brothers. Well, they laughed at J.C. Boyle, too, and at his self-doffing hat. But then they were right to laugh in J.C. Boyle's case. On the other hand, some inventors got it just exactly right. Elijah McCoy's automatic lubricating device, for instance, served its purpose so perfectly that pretty soon people were demanding nothing but the real McCoy. Do you know this man? You owe him a debt of thanks. Our lives would be a lot less pleasant if Willis Carrier had not invented the air conditioner in 1902. What's this? Did babies shave once upon a time? Of course not. But what a great ad this was for the safety razor king Gillette, patented in 1904. In 1935, Charles Darrow made a great fantasy come true. For a little while at least, even in the depths of the Depression, we could all be millionaires. Monopoly millionaires. Richard W. Sears and Alva C. Roebuck. In the little towns all across America, their catalog became a book of dreams, filled with page after page of delights to hanker after and stare at and to save up for. The 1905 Sears Roebuck catalog devoted 60 pages to devices that brought music into the American home. Devices like Thomas Edison's great wonder, the phonograph.
I am the Edison phonograph, created by the great wizard of the New World to delight those who would have melody or be amused. I can sing you tender songs of love. I can give you merry tales and joyous laughter. I can transport you to the realms of music. I can call you to join in the rhythmic dance. No matter what may be your mood, I am always ready to entertain you.
Edward Muybridge did groundbreaking work in photographing animal and human movement in the 1880s. He broke complex movements down into their sequential parts with an invention of his own called the zoopraxiscope. Tom Edison was fascinated, and Edison's fascination led to an interesting little device based on the zoopraxiscope, by means of which Edison could project a moving image. The device would catch on in a pretty big way. Then George Eastman introduced celluloid film. Suddenly, Edison and some others had all they needed to usher in the age of the movie. This was Edison's first studio, the Black Maria in West Orange, New Jersey. Here he made his earliest short, simple films, which were little more than his own studies of movement, including a steamy study called The Kiss, actually reviewed by the Los Angeles Times. Overpowering, they called it, luscious osculation. Trains had been the wonder of the 19th century. A movie about a train was a wonder of the 20th. The Great Train Robbery in 1903 told a story on film for the first time. It was 11 minutes long because that was the length of one reel of film. Moviegoers screamed when George Barnes took aim at them and fired. Before long, we were movie mad, and Hollywood was cranking out pictures by the carload. Americans were falling desperately in love with men and women they would never meet. Like Rudolph Valentino, for whom the description tall, dark, and handsome might have been invented. Women swooned, though men smirked. When they weren't falling in love with the figures on the screen, audiences were laughing at them. Buster Keaton, that great comic genius, could turn any American street corner into a vaudeville stage. Other greats like Laurel and Hardy offered proof of the excellence of American engineering. The engineering of laughter.
I told you not to make that last payment.
December 15th, 1939, Gone with the Wind opens in Atlanta. As everyone in the country knows by now, the British actress Vivien Leigh has won the starring role of Scarlett O'Hara by defeating the 1,400 other actresses who tried out for the part. Frankly, my dears, everybody here on Peachtree Street and everywhere else around America does give a damn about seeing Vivien Leigh with her glamorous co-star, Clark Gable.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I am here just as a spectator. I want to see Gone with the Wind the same as you do. And this is Margaret Mitchell's night and the people of Atlanta's night. Allow me, please, to see Gone with the Wind as a spectator. Thank you.
This all gets to be very big business, what with 85 million people a week going to the movies to escape everyday life for a few hours at a time in the company of tall heroes, such as Gary Cooper, and short ones, such as Shirley Temple. These home movies of life behind the scenes during the making of The Wizard of Oz were shot by Harold Arlen, whose real job was writing songs. Somewhere Over the Rainbow is a song that Harold Arlen wrote for Judy Garland to sing. Can't act, can dance a little. That's what the report on Fred Astaire's first screen test said. Then he teamed up with Ginger Rogers, and their studio insured his legs for $1 million. When Fred and Ginger danced, we all felt swell. Transportation has seen some of the biggest changes in this century that made America great. Time was, and it wasn't so long ago at that, we got around slowly in horse carts. Even long after the railroads vanquished distance, most of us never traveled very far from home. Until Henry Ford put us on the road. Here in the 1930s, Ford drives one of his earliest models, already an antique. Henry Ford was as recognizable to Americans as a lot of movie stars were. We knew him as the giant who put millions of us behind the wheel. But Henry Ford did not invent the automobile, nor did he invent the assembly line, for which he is so famous. What he did was to make mass production so efficient that he could turn out cars as if they were toasters. By 1913, his factory was producing 1,000 Model Ts a day at just 2 man-hours per car. The Model T was an occasionally reliable 20-horsepower contraption that would rattle along at 25 miles per hour, and the cost of $440 was affordable. Henry Ford put the car in reach of the average Joe. And before you knew it, the entire country was within our reach.
If you ever plan to motor west, travel my way, take the highway, that's the best. Get your kicks on Route 66. It winds from Chicago to...
Roads like Route 66 connected us as a nation. Business flourished. Motor courts sprouted across the countryside. And cafes where the cook in the kitchen still baked the pie you ordered for lunch.
Now you go through St. Louis, Joplin, Missouri, and Oklahoma City. That's mighty pretty, you'll see. Amarillo, Gallup, New Mexico, Flagstaff, Arizona, don't forget Winona, Kingman, Barstow, San Bernardino. Aren't you get hip to this time, this hip? When you make that California trip, get your kicks on Route 66.
The new roads meant that people could live further and further from downtown and still work there. There began a building boom in this country, the likes of which America had never seen before. 10 million GIs came home at war's end. Thanks to the GI Bill, any veteran who wanted to go to college could afford to do just that, as also he could afford to get married and have children, which was why the country needed homes, lots of homes. Model homes like these became homes, in fact, at the rate of 12 a day. For $8,000, with just $20 down, you got a place to raise a family with a TV set, a washing machine, and a barbecue. The American dream come true on a vast scale. The suburbs had arrived with room in them for millions of Americans, as long as they were white Americans. There was still work to do on the American dream.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes, little boxes, little boxes all the same. There's a green one and a pink one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses all went to the university, where they all were put in boxes, little boxes all the same. And there's doctors and there's lawyers and business executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.
Every appliance has made living easier, life more pleasant. There are so many wonderful machines a woman has today to help her in her work. Just flip a switch or turn a knob and presto, food cooked deliciously and automatically.
In the kitchen, muscle power was giving way to the power of the machine.
The refrigerator keeps day-to-day food in perfect freshness. And the dishwasher? Now there's a machine that does away with a chore that everybody hates.
Golly, I'm so impressed.
Of course, there's no use pretending that a housewife and mother has nothing left to do. There's more than enough to keep her busy. What has happened, though, is that industry has eliminated most of the drudgery of housework.
Hello, yes, this is Mary. How are you? Bye.
They say your kitchen dazzles every eye.
A brand new sink, a built-in oven, a new refrigerator, and a phone, a kitchen phone, a bright red phone.
Far from dressing up and dancing around the kitchen, what most Americans wanted was to get their food as quickly as possible. We may think of the quest for the fast meal as something new, but actually, we've been wolfing down lunch for more than 100 years now. Our search for convenience has led to an unprecedented marriage of food and technology, and good things to eat are found everywhere now. In fact, no other country has ever made eating more democratic. Haute cuisine may not be our strong suit, but when it comes to good, wholesome food, widely available, easy to prepare at reasonable cost, America leads the world. And any American with a long memory carries around the names of 1,000 products and the sounds of 1,000 jingles in his head.
They're crispy, they're crunchy, the whole year through. Jack Armstrong never tires of them, and neither will you. So just buy Wheaties, the best breakfast food in the land.
Here's a great champion in action, Larry Yogi Berra, famous catcher for the New York Yankees. And that's a dangerous hitter. Uh-oh, it's a high foul. Yogi races back, and he's got it for the out. No doubt about it, Yogi Berra has the spark of a champion. How about you? Wouldn't you like that spark? Wouldn't you like that drive that makes the difference?
Here's another time saver, the quick way to get Heinz ketchup to pour. Watch.
Just tap the neck of the bottle 3 times, and here comes Red Magic made from Heinz Aristocrat tomatoes.
The TV dinner. Who but Americans would name a meal for what they look at while they eat it? Well, it has a nice innovative sound to it anyway, and we do like innovation and innovators. Take this New Yorker named Clarence Birdseye. A trip to Labrador convinced him that fresh food could be kept fresh by freezing it. Clarence Birdseye was right. We get our food out of the same soil as our forebears did, of course, but the means we use to get it to our tables would astound them. And even Henry Ford would be amazed to see an assembly line turning out our daily bread. Of course, the assembly line also has fed our sense of humor.
Oh, this is easier. Yeah, we can handle this okay.
Fine, you're doing splendidly. Speed it up a little!
Good nutrition has long been a national obsession in this country, and the suppliers of our daily bread have never been shy about taking the credit for our good health, whether they deserved it or not.
Recent years have seen a remarkable improvement in the nutritional health of America. Much of this improvement has been credited to the enrichment of white bread.
In the past 100 years, we have brought illness after illness under control with sulfa drugs and penicillin and antibiotics. Americans have made great contributions to saving lives in this century. Many of us still remember how millions of parents sighed a great sigh of relief in 1955 when it became clear that the vaccine announced by Jonas Salk would eradicate polio. Artificial hearts, and who knows what's next. Think of this. An American baby boy born in the year 1900 could expect to live to the age of 48. A baby girl would live to be 51. We are beneficiaries of marvels unimaginable at the beginning of the century. Computers, lasers, ultrasonic and fiber optic tools that can see inside us, that can reattach limbs, that can perform bladeless surgery. We live longer and healthier lives than ever before, and who knows what tomorrow will bring. When this century began, who knew what tomorrow would bring in space? Robert Goddard knew. In 1926, this unassuming physics professor launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. He led us on a path to the moon. But at the time, few noticed in this country. German scientists, however, were paying attention. More's the pity. Following Goddard's lead, the Germans built the V-1 and V-2 rockets that rained terrible destruction on England during the Second World War. London was a dark city during the war, dark but for the incessant explosions of the German rockets. Yet in one of the great ironies of the 20th century, brilliant German rocket scientists such as Wernher von Braun became prominent theoreticians in America's race for space against the Russians.
In the 20th century, man stands at the crossroads. Any ballistic missile which can carry a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental range can carry in its nose instead a few instruments on a trip to the moon. The choices between a new, undreamed-of horizon and universal destruction. Which shall it be?
The space race began on October 4th, 1957, with the launching by the Soviets of the Sputnik satellite.
The first artificial Earth satellite in the world has now been created. This first satellite was today successfully launched in the USSR.
America was shocked. How could communist technology surpass our own? More important, what did it mean for military supremacy in outer space? Senator Lyndon Johnson of Texas tried to calm us down some.
Well, the information we received does not lead us to any conclusions of helplessness or despair. We're lagging in both the satellite and missile field. But there's no reason to believe that we cannot catch up if we have the will to win and if we just pitch in and get going.
1 month after Sputnik, the Soviets sent the first living being, a dog named Laika, up into space. America tried to launch a satellite before very long, but the launch was not a spectacular success.
Red and white checkered gantry tower has now been pulled aside and brought back a distance of perhaps 200 yards to completely expose the three-stage rocket to view. Here she goes, flames shooting out from under the bottom of it. And a huge ball of fire rising up perhaps 100 feet.
The Soviets expressed their sympathy. Thanks, we said, and went back to work, doing the testing that was needed to be done in order to send a man into space. One test simulated weightlessness. It was observed by Walter Cronkite.
This is Walter Cronkite reporting from the cabin of a C-131 over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio. This aircraft is executing a maneuver to make it and everyone in it temporarily weightless. What are the hazards and what are our scientists doing to ensure man's survival in the hostile environment of outer space?
One way to ensure that survival was to send up animals first. Mice, then monkeys, then a robot would precede man into space. The early flights with animals and robots were successful. Meanwhile, the more mundane needs of men in space were being seen to, as Walter Cronkite learned in a visit with an Air Force nutritionist.
Miss Finkelstein, can you show us your ideal kitchen for a flight to the moon?
Yes, I'd love to. This is our freezing unit. Here we have bread and butter sandwiches, and we also have fruit in cans.
Well, now, what are these containers? They're obviously special, but what is the special function of them? Why do they look like this?
They look like this so that a man will be able to eat in 0G, or in a state of weightlessness.
May I try it?
Certainly.
Thank you. Is it loaded?
Yes, it is.
Just like this one.
Right.
Roast beef.
In 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was established. Of 508 candidates, 7 men were chosen to be the astronauts of Project Mercury, the first step toward landing man on the moon. These test pilots were the space-age equivalents of World War I's aces, and America promptly fell in love with them and eagerly followed every minute of their training.
Gentlemen, which one of you looks forward to being the first man into space?
But the first man into space was not an American. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a Russian cosmonaut, went entirely around the Earth one time out there in space. Americans were not happy.
We don't want to find the hammer and sickle flag standing up on one of the peaks of the moon. We want it to be the Star-Spangled Banner.
Within 1 month of Gagarin's flight, on May 5, 1961, a day that few Americans will ever forget, NASA crews readied astronaut Alan Shepard for the flight of Freedom 7. It was perfect. For those who were keeping score, and everybody was keeping score, America was finally on the scoreboard.
Okay, Freedom 7. On the periscope. What a beautiful view. Cloud cover over Florida. 3 to 4 tips near the eastern coast. Obscures up through Hatteras.
On a tour of America's rocket facilities, President Kennedy told the nation what our goal had to be. It was time, literally, to shoot for the moon.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
John Glenn was our next ace in space. Less than a year after Alan Shepard's flight, Glenn would get his chance at history. A journey 3 times around the Earth at a speed of nearly 18,000 miles an hour. The country held its breath.
All recorders too fast, T-minus 18 seconds and counting, engine start. May the wee ones be with you, Thomas. Good Lord, ride all the way. Godspeed, John Glenn. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous. Roger, understand go for at least 7 orbits.
We feel it's far safer to re-enter with the retro package on. We see no difficulty at this time in that type of re-entry. Over.
Roger.
I think after all of our talk about space, though, this morning coming up from Florida on the plane with President Kennedy, we had the opportunity to meet Mrs. Kennedy and Caroline before we took off. I think Caroline really cut us down to size and put us back in our proper position, though, when after being introduced, she looked up and said, "Where's the monkey?"
The world came to Cape Kennedy to celebrate as the space program reached its zenith in 1969. On July 16th, tomorrow, 3 Americans would leave this place, bound for the moon. There are pre-launch parties all over the Cape. Jitters, too, of course, all over the Cape and all over the country. By dawn, the sightseers, lots of sightseers, are in place. John Kennedy's challenge to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade motivated 500,000 American workers and 200 million other Americans to prepare for this moment. The crew has been awake since 4:45. Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, Lunar Module Commander Buzz Aldrin, and Mission Commander Neil Armstrong have their breakfast down here on Earth. They will digest that breakfast a few hours from now on their way to the moon. Every step has been rehearsed over and over and over. They are cool customers, these pioneers, for men who are going further into the unknown than Magellan ever did, or Vespucci or Columbus, much further. They are going 250,000 miles up and out and away. They will be further from home than any humans have ever been before.
Good morning. It's T-minus 1 hour, 29 minutes, and 53 seconds and counting in just an hour and a half. If all goes well, Apollo 11 astronauts Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins are to lift off from pad 39A out there on the voyage man always has dreamed about. Next stop for them, the moon.
We passed T-minus 60. 55 seconds and counting. Neil Armstrong reported back when he received the good wishes. Thank you very much. We know it will be a good flight. Good luck and Godspeed. 40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
9:32 a.m. The liftoff is flawless. The Saturn rocket slowly gathers speed. 1 billion people around the world watch and urge the giant engine on and wish those being propelled by it Godspeed. 2.5 minutes later, at more than 6,000 miles per hour, the first stage separates. And the second stage booster ignites, almost tripling Apollo's speed to more than 15,000 miles per hour. At an altitude of 116 miles, the rocket's second stage will separate and the spacecraft will enter Earth orbit. The beginning is over. The trip, the real trip, lies ahead. They are traveling at nearly 25,000 miles an hour now. The third stage is jettisoned. The command module Columbia and the lunar module Eagle set out on a 3-day journey to the moon.
Eagle, Houston, we see you on the steerable, over. Roger, Eagle, send dot. Roger, how does it look? The Eagle has wings. Roger.
And now the lunar module Eagle has separated from the Columbia and is cruising above the surface of the moon, ready to begin its descent. With minutes to go, Neil Armstrong of Wapakoneta, Ohio, and Buzz Aldrin of Montclair, New Jersey, make final preparations.
Okay, all flight controllers, gonna go for landing. Retro. Go. Fido. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go for landing. 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet. Into the ag, 47 degrees. Roger.
And then, just above the surface, a major malfunction. Eagle's computers are overloaded. A 1201 alarm. They must decide instantly whether or not to abort.
1201. 1201. Roger.
His heart races, but Neil Armstrong takes control.
We're go, flight. Okay, we're go. We're go. Same type. We're go. Roger, 1202. We copy it. 35 degrees. 750. Coming down to 23.
With fuel dangerously low, Armstrong maneuvers his craft to a better landing site.
75 feet. Guys looking good. Down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward. Just. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute. Okay, I just checked getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. I'm going to step off the LEM now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful from here, Neil. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
Houston, Columbia on the high gain, over.
Columbia, this is Houston, reading you loud and clear, over.
Yeah, reading you loud and clear. How's it going?
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now.
Eagle is down on the moon. It will stay on the moon for just over 21 hours, while Michael Collins orbits above in Columbia.
Hello, Apollo 11, Houston, how did it go?
Armstrong and Aldrin have fuel enough for only one attempt to rejoin Columbia. They make it. The men who have been further from home than any before them can come home.
Roughly about 50,000.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. I've got the morning news here if you're interested, over.
Yeah, we sure are. We're ready to copy and comment. Okay, first off,
Looks like it's going to be impossible to get away from the fact that you guys are dominating all the news back here on Earth. Even Pravda in Russia is headlining the mission and calls Neil the czar of the ship. And in Corby, England, an Irishman, John Coyle, has won the world porridge eating championship by consuming 23 bowls of instant oatmeal. I'd like to enter Aldrin in the oatmeal eating contest next time. He's on his 19th bowl. Roger.
Good evening. I'm Walter Cronkite. Man's first trip to the moon, a magnificent 8-day voyage spanning time and space and history, ended today when 3 American explorers brought their small ship down safely in the Pacific. Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin and Michael Collins landed their spacecraft southwest of Hawaii at 10 minutes of 1 Eastern Time, 9 miles from the recovery ship and 2 miles off target. It was only day before yesterday, measured on the clock of evolution, that man stood half erect in the swamp and gazed up in terror at the lunar light. It was only yesterday that he tied a scrap of sail to a branch on a few planks and fought moontide to voyage beyond the shallow basin of his first abode. It was only this morning, by evolution's clock, that he fashioned a glass that brought distance close and showed him that his world, the epicenter of everything, was only a small speck in a second-rate solar system. Now tonight, man has taken a small step, mankind a giant leap, toward the galaxies through which spaceship Earth floats.
For today and for tomorrow, we now have the shuttle, a reusable spacecraft that leaves the Earth like a rocket and comes back again like an airplane.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Solid rocket ignition and liftoff.
The way the world thinks about the moon and the stars and the planets has been forever changed in the century that made America great. The way the world does its work was changed forever in this century, too, by Americans. The computer has been at the heart of much of the change. When ever before has so small and unassuming a box made such a difference in so many ways? It took armies of employees once, most of them women, to get the day's work done down at the office. The men were too busy running things and inventing things, they would have said, to do the clerical work themselves.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, computers that fit in the palm of your hand can store as much information as it once took a room-sized computer to handle.
Good evening, everyone. This is Walter Cronkite speaking to you from CBS Television Election Headquarters here in New York City. The big election night, 1952, the year when the United States picks its 35th president.
We first noticed the electronic brain back when one of them, the UNIVAC, or Universal Automatic Computer, stunned us by predicting the results of the 1952 presidential election before a national television audience.
This is the face of a UNIVAC. A UNIVAC is a fabulous electronic machine which we have borrowed to help us predict this election from the basis of the early returns as they come in. On the right of the UNIVAC, there's something which looks like a typewriter. That's the way UNIVAC talks. He can remember 15 million digits or alphabetical characters. You see those round things over there look kind of like candy mints? Well, those are reels of metallic tape which contain some of the information he has to have. They can feed information to UNIVAC at the rate of about 10,000 numbers a second. And what's more, UNIVAC can assimilate it.
There was a time when tinkerers could cobble together clever new inventions out in the garage. And you know what? They still can. In fact, it was in their garage that Steve Wozniak and Stephen Jobs put together the first Apple computer. The company they started is at the center now of a multi-billion-dollar industry. And some men are still doing their darndest to figure out how to avoid typing.
Start dictation. John Doe's address. Please write to Mr. Wright right away and tell him that it's too late to get to the airport by 2 o'clock, period.
The computer has brought change not just to the American office, but to the American home.
Hello, Larry. You have 4 new messages and 3 reminders.
Hi, this is Bruce from E.T.'s Pizza. First, you need to select a pizza size. For payment, we accept American Express, Visa, ATM cards, and cash.
Although the computer is not what we thought we would have in our homes come the future, we thought we would have robots.
Yes, ma'am. Rolo, get.
The computer has probably worked out a lot better than any robot ever would have. The computer is in our cars, too. Perhaps no one ever again will have to master the esoteric art of refolding a road map.
You are within 9/10 miles of your destination. Your car may be off the planned route. If so, press the OK route button or en route.
Of course, with that voice along for a cross-country drive, we may find ourselves pining for the silent map of old. The century that made America great. Just think about this. Today, you can look anywhere, look everywhere. Look up into space, look down through a microscope. Look at your dashboard, look at your computer screen. Look at the electronic library you can hold in your hand, or the baseball card with a hologram on it. Take a telephone out of your pocket and make a call, send a fax, send email, send a CAT scan picture to a specialist half a world away. There never has been so much change in what is, after all, only a single century. Tom Edison himself would be stunned to look around now, no matter where he looked. It is hard to think of any society in the history of the world that has been so profoundly changed in such a short time. We are healthier, we know more, we can do more. We can do more with the push of one button than our grandparents could do with all the main force they could muster. And consider this, if what we take for granted now could not have been dreamed by even the wildest visionaries a generation or two ago, then what might there be to come just around the corner? Is there another Thomas Edison out there? You bet there is. I'm Charles Osgood, and this is the century that made America great.